Thank you all for coming out on this windy night. I appreciate it. We have a fantastic guest tonight, a true legend in the effects business, and that's no overstatement. I've known Mark for years. He's a good friend of mine. We've worked on a lot of independent films, but Mark goes back to the heyday, the birth of effects, of modern effects. He started with George Lucas, Industrial Light and Magic, literally started on, I believe it was the ABYSS, and then went straight to Terminator 2, and then of course designed the effects for Jurassic Park. All, iconic films from that era. Mark then became a director. After that, segued into that. He's kind of like a Renaissance man. So there's many areas we'll discuss tonight with him, but he went on to become a feature film director, directed a classic called SPUN, numerous other films, a couple with me, independent films. And then in the past 5 to 10 years, he started an animation company. And he makes a lot of fantastic independent animated films. And we're going to touch upon different areas that he's worked on over this conversation, which he's going to break down the shots, as Wendy said. So without further ado, since you're here to see the main man himself, Mark Dippé. I think we'll just go back and forth with our questions, but to me, you got your start basically almost like at the birth of when all of these iconic directors, Lucas Ranch. This is kind of a general question, but what was it like? I mean, that's a pretty legendary place, Lucas Ranch, and working with George and those three directors alone, changed the business. What are your memories of that era?
Well, I mean, I would say it was completely exciting. Being at ILM then, ILM up to that time it was the leader in, like, I guess you could call it more traditional effects, motion control cameras, motion control rigs, what they call downshooters. I mean, all the stuff. I don't know what you have here, but there's all these techniques of computer-controlled mechanisms to shoot things differently.
Sure.
They would do stuff like shoot 2 pieces of film and put one. They could take a guy and make him fly by taking actually a piece of film and shooting it as the camera moves. Or they could take a little model of a spaceship and put it on a little rod that would have it turn, then have a camera coming down a track flying towards it, and it would look like it's flying away from you. So they were the experts at all this stuff. That was used for Star Wars and tons of other movies. We used a lot of that kind of stuff on a movie called Hunt for Red October that I also worked on. But it was the dawn of the digital age.
Right.
And being there, all the biggest filmmakers came through there.
Right.
I mean, I met everybody, and we got asked about all kinds of movies, and we were the guys that had new answers and new ideas. So it was, we got a seat at the table, kind of. We got to. I mean, it was just amazing all the stuff that that happened then.
Sure.
And after Jurassic, it just blew apart.
Sure.
I mean, literally, Lucas, ILM and Lucasfilm are in Marin County, up by north of San Francisco, but I was in LA all the time.
Right.
I mean, this is still where this is where the filmmaking world was. And I also met a lot of very interesting non-traditional filmmakers. I was telling Tim earlier, I saw Werner Herzog's thing was out there. He came and met with you several times because he wanted to do an interesting take on the Montezuma story. So that's a period piece that requires reconstruction and building of digital sets and worlds. And of course, he didn't want to do it in a conventional way. Several other, it was a really dynamic time because there were people that wanted to use these techniques in non-blockbuster style movies.
Right.
The problem was it was way too expensive. But people were very excited about that.
When you're just watching Jurassic Park, if you go to Universal tours, the famous story, of course, is with Spielberg and the Jaws mechanical that never worked, right? So, at the time, I thought they had a disaster on their hands, and it worked to their benefit in some weird way because they never showed the shark. And the music, obviously, the score kind of sold it. But, so I would imagine when Spielberg saw your test, it must have been one of those moments in filmmaking history, right? Because
were you in the room with him?
No, I actually was not when he saw it. It was a very controlled thing. Okay. Very controlled thing. But no, I wasn't in the room when he actually saw the test. And it was a really, I talked about it, but politically it was a really complicated process to even get there. I mean, there was lots of reasons. One is the doubts, but there were also, I think, there was this whole old guard that was seeing their world fall apart. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really was a big transformation. I mean, even at ILM itself, all the people that worked the optical printers, all the people that did a lot of this sort of, let's call it physical effects oriented work, it all shifted radically. You know,
they were out of work now.
Yeah, and at ILM they began training using the systems, and they became people that did match moving or rotoscoping, but on computers, not on. People would do match moves with cameras as well, motion control, digitizing cameras. But it was a time of great change, and it was really exciting, and so much was happening. The other thing about visual effects back in the day, and it's still kind of true, is every time we worked on a movie, it was something new, something you hadn't seen. So everything you did was like this grand experiment in filmmaking. Right. And nowadays, I think so much has been done. A lot of the best visual effects are things you don't even know. Mm-hmm. You know, you'll see a movie and you don't know what's real or not, and it's not even what you're thinking. It's just all feels realistic or real. And I think back then it was just a struggle to do anything. So it was always innovative. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is you were kind of the forefront. You were the effects guy on all these movies, and then you had your directorial debut in '97 with SPUN. Right. What was that like, working with people, you know, that were doing what you were doing? Was it good that you could speak the language, or was it frustrating because you're not in there doing it?
It was. I mean, one of the reasons I was allowed to do SPUN is we did that for a fractional budget of equivalent movie of the day. And basically, all the effects work was done by people that I knew, basically, all over the world. And yeah, it made a big difference. So that part, and you know, I still work with other directors doing visual effects, and it can be an impediment. I mean, to me, let's say computer animation, computer graphics, just another tool. Mm-hmm. And the art of filmmaking or the craft of filmmaking is complex. I mean, I don't know how many of you, but for example, I know you have Alexa cameras. Mm-hmm. How many of you out there can really operate them? Because there's a million settings on those cameras, and you got to have a DIT to make sure you don't screw it up when you're scrolling through the menus and stuff. I mean, the technology of filmmaking is complex. That's the funny thing. People, back when I was doing, they would go, "Oh man, that's just way too difficult." It's like even knowing all the different configurations of lighting and the right plugs to put them in, and you know, blah blah blah. All this stuff, the craft requires a fair amount of knowledge, and I think. Most filmmakers today have educated themselves as to what digital techniques give you, what the issues are. Mm-hmm. And if you aren't well educated, then you either have to have the confidence to defer to somebody who is, and some filmmakers are wise enough to do that, or you can just get caught up in it. You know, mm-hmm. it can make your days not go very well, basically. You know,
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Complicated.
You know, we talk a lot about the early on films, but I know recently you worked on studio films like Paranormal Activity.
Right.
You've gone kind of full circle from working on these epics, so to speak, with Spielberg, to the micro-budgeted films, but using big effects in a small film. Talk about that a little bit, how that's kind of a different.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. So what the Paranormal Activity films are, they're quite a... They're Paranormal Activity, there you go. But they're unusual. They're a special case that really had an impact on the studios. Because basically you had these movies that are made on a micro budget that they put in real marketing money, and you probably have all heard this. To release a movie in the US costs tens of millions of dollars, it's a big deal. However, and usually you don't do that for a movie that only cost you $2 million to make. It's just the economics are a little bit odd. But in the case of Paranormal Activity, you could spend a few million making the movie, more than that, but say less than 10, market it at a normal cost, and the box office might be $250 million. So there's an unusual model. The most similar thing would have been like Blair Witch. That kind of had a similar reality. Sure. So what is it about these movies? They realized there's something, the studio realized there's something precious about this type of movie, and they didn't want to destroy it by turning it into Spider-Man or something. Right. They wanted to keep true to it, but they also wanted to apply the most sophisticated filmmaking principles. So they brought on people like myself who'd worked on a lot of movies to help with the design of the effects or the scares or whatever you might call it. But at the same time, they didn't want it to look too polished or separate it too much from the sort of original kind of homegrown Paranormal Activity. So it was an unusual environment in the sense that they had a very sophisticated group working with these sort of young new filmmakers who were doing things in a very simplistic way, but everyone was there just to make sure the sort of production value or the quality or that there was nothing hampering the vision of the film.
Right.
The other consequence is because the film was so inexpensive to make, and I'm speaking the Paranormal Activity 2 in particular, or maybe it was 3. 3 was the one I think that was the most interesting in the sense that it was the one with all the security cameras. I'm not getting it all confused now, but there's one where the house has got all the security cameras set up. Is that 3? Haven't you guys seen those movies? For crying out loud, okay. Well, I mean, I thought everyone did. But so 3 is where the house has got all these cameras in it, and there's an interesting reality to this: is you could essentially walk and shoot the whole. You could walk through the whole script and shoot the whole script in literally a week.
Right.
And the cost is so inexpensive. You can shoot it, cut it, and say, Act 3 is not working. This isn't really working. Let's rewrite it a little bit. Let's do it again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the second one's pretty dang good, and let's rewrite this scene, let's add some stuff here in the sequence, and let's shoot the whole thing again. And the budget is still minuscule to any normal any normal studio movie. So it was really, I think it was for the studio, they realized you can't you can't destroy the specialness of what made it work for the audience, but you could work it to extract as much money out of as you could, basically. and I'll tell you what I was there and I advised them, I gave them a lot of ideas, and we did a lot of cool things, but it was interesting to me. They would tone it down and not make it too slick. And the visual effects that are in there are really relatively simplistic, even though they might have been hard to execute. But they're nothing that fancy. I remember there was a really cool idea that I came up with I really loved. I want to use it in the movie. And the idea is that there's like this ghost that's going to grab you and drag you around. I should have brought that to show. It's a cool thing. And this idea was, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have a guy dressed in black, a big stunt guy. And what's going to happen is that there's a woman washing dishes. I think it's in number 3. And all of a sudden she's going to be lifted and dragged. So what's happening is this huge guy, and he's got this vest with all these hooks, and he's attached to her. Okay? And at the right moment, he just lifts her up and starts running around the room and shaking her. And we removed him. And it's like unbelievable. It's like, what the fuck? She's flinging, she's knocking the table over. And when you erase the guy, you can see the physics of somebody. It's literally like someone's grabbed her and it's just flinging her like a rag doll.
Wow.
And the shot was great, but then they go, that's too fancy. See, that doesn't fit in this movie.
Oh.
And it was never used.
Interesting.
Well, the interesting thing is, in your business, and you talked about this a little bit, technology, the evolution of technology is changing all the time with cameras, with computers, with the software that you're using. How do you stay up on it? Is it more of the principles are always the same, or, you know?
That's a really good, that's a really good question. So back in the day of the ABYSS, I could run all the software we had because there wasn't that much. I knew how to do all of it. I could do anything. Today, I really can't use the software very well at all compared to the people who are experienced at it. But the principles are the same. So as a director or a producer, I know it's capable and I understand, and I can speak the language even though I can't do it nearly as well as this other person. And yeah, the software is much more sophisticated. And occasionally I'll get in and learn something, but usually I get to the point where I go, man, this guy's been doing it for 5 years. I'm not going to learn this in a month. Forget it. And actually the craft is so mature. There are people who specialize in very specific things, you know, people that are experts at match moving, so making the virtual world camera equal to a real camera. There are people who specialize in things like modeling, people who specialize in rigging. I'm sure a lot of you guys know what this all is. People specialize in animations, people who specialize in effects animation versus character animation. People who specialize in physical simulations, you know, things like water and fire. People that, a good friend of mine is one of the wizards in the world. He works at WETA at rigid body simulations, and so for example, he did the, you know, what's the Smog, the latest Hobbit movie.
Oh, no.
Okay,
Right.
so he did a lot of the shots when they're in the layer with all those coins. Okay, there's literally like a billion geometric entities. So how do you simulate the physical interactions? Because as the coins move, they all interact, and to do that, you can't just use the software. You have to be clever, because it's literally you'd be computing for years. So anyway, I mention that because there's so many specific arenas that people specialize in, that it's almost impossible for someone to be able to do everything now.
Are there usually, you know, for the students that are getting out to go work in VFX, are there entry-level jobs that, like rotoscoping, cleaning keys? Is there something that maybe they should focus on?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. The other thing that the visual effects industry is evolving, a lot of support tasks are outsourced, I would say. Here's what I would suggest. If you're serious about it, you first find whatever really interests you, but I would say become expert at the stuff that's hard to do. That's what I would say. Go for the stuff that's hard to do.
Same thing in animation? What's hard to do?
Be a great animator. Be a great person that can do realistic effects. Be someone who really knows how to make water. I mean, I know it gets a little weird sounding, but if you can do something that's difficult to do, then you have something. If you're really good at rotoscoping, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a lot of people who are good at rotoscoping. That's what I would say. That'd be my advice. And cleanup work too, like things like removing that cable in Jurassic Park. That's just standard stuff now. And, I mean, we're finishing a movie right now, and there's shots, there's takes that they weren't going to use originally in which there's all kinds of light stands and grips. And we like this better, just remove them all. It's just standard now. It really isn't. I was going to show you some examples, but we ran out of time. In the old days, for example, this is shot with a different hangover too. They originally shot a Thai airliner landing, okay? So they're in Thailand, a Thai airliner lands. Something happened with the rights and it had to be changed to a Delta airliner. In the old days, you would just go back there and shoot a Delta airliner landing. Nowadays, change it, okay? And it's really true. It's cheaper to change it now. So but it's hard. So those are the kind of things that it's just, I would look at what you have a passion for. So, for example, doing photorealistic caricatured creatures like a Garfield the cat in live action, or a Scooby-Doo in live action, or a Magilla gorilla in live action, or whatever. These kind of cartoonish characters but live in the real world. That's a specialty that has a lot of value. Animating, being able to do complex physical effects like billions of coins falling, buildings catching on fire, buildings collapsing. You remember the sequence in King Kong when he's tearing up the city? Being able to know how to do that has puts you in a place of desirability. And so I would just find whatever interests you the most, and I would go for the hard stuff.
And then how would you recommend students, I'm sure at your company you see reels all the time in portfolios, how do they market that or get that, any advice for when they're putting their portfolio
You put your finger on it. In this business, even though it's technical, it's a creative thing in the end, and your reel is what it's all about. Your reel and your resume. Which comes first though, it's going to be your reel. Your reel is going to get your opportunities. Hopefully you'll get to do work that can show off your talent that looks good in your resume and you can add to your reel. But I would say the reel is the fundamental thing. You have to show what you've done, and it needs to represent something that's interesting. And also, when you're going out for work, it's like casting. Just like actors, if they have to, it's all stereotypical, regardless of what they talk to you about casting. I want a funny girl. She's got to be kind of small. If you're 6'4", you're not going to get the part. And it's a similar kind of thing. I mean, that's all, I always think of it as casting. So if I'm looking for someone to do animation, I look at the reel and I meet them, and it's even though it's not about how they look, it's the work they've done and how they talk about their work. It's the same kind of thing. So again, I would just find what you're passionate about and really show good examples of that. And the richer the examples are, the better. That's what I would say.
That's great.
We'll open it up to questions in a minute, but I'm just curious to go full circle on this conversation. You saw CG, up at Lucas Ranch, and then obviously 3D was kind of the big thing in the past 5 years, which Cameron was involved with.
All right.
What do you think's next? Is it virtual reality?
Well, they talk about that a lot. I mean, I do think that the sort of fully immersive experiences, like you wear the headset and everywhere you look, I think there's a lot of interest to that. Yeah. One thing that happened in Asia a lot that didn't happen much here, when Avatar came out, there are theaters where all the seats move, and they actually got Cameron and the producers to cooperate, and they actually showed it there's only 2 or 3 theaters like that in Seoul, and they did a motion control base with Avatar, so while you're watching it, you're moving. And those shows sold out for like 2 years. And I was always surprised that that I haven't seen more of that here.
So kind of like a Universal when you go to Simpson ride.
It's right. It's more like a ride. You go see a movie as a ride, and I've always thought that become a bigger experience.
Yeah.
Again, it's in stereo, so you're wearing 3D glasses and you're moving around.
Right.
But the immersive thing I like a lot, but the immersive thing is more like gaming, and I mean, it's a big debate. I mean, look, even years ago, I was involved with these experiments of like you could choose which branch to take in the story. Does she go off him or not?
Oh.
And all those things, they don't really work.
I didn't buy that.
And even the immersive experience, it's more like gaming rather than a movie. The movie experience, to me, the narrative is being guided by somebody who you're letting them take you somewhere.
Right.
And the immersive experience typically requires you to be more involved, and they're just different. You know, I don't think it's more like gaming to me. So you're gonna, I mean, there's all kinds of great ideas, and I've been involved with some of these discussions or possible projects. You know, like you could, as a scene is playing out, you can go explore what the guy's got under the table as a viewer. Right. But then that changes. It's like Hitchcock would show you the gun or not show you the gun. See, now if you have the choice to go look what's inside the briefcase, it changes everything.
Right.
So they're just different. I don't know which is the best way to go, really.
Do you see yourself as an animator, a visual effects artist, a director, or is it all kind of combined into one? Is there a line?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, now, honestly, I'm not good enough to be an animator. I'm not even good enough to be a visual effects artist, really. It's sort of passed me by. I'm the old fogey or something.
I don't know if we'd agree with that.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
but no, I look at myself more as, and that's one of the advantages of why I changed my path. When I started, before I got involved in these more commercial endeavors, I was going to be this experimental filmmaker. So now I consider myself more of a filmmaker. It's more of a business, but that is what excites me, is to make movies. It's nothing more debilitating, and you know, I don't know how long any of you have been in the business, but there's nothing more debilitating than to be working on 5 projects for 5 years, and even to get paid for it, but they don't get made into movies. And after you've gone through that, which if you're in the LA system, it would happen to you. For most people, that happens. It's the very few that get to make movie after movie after movie after movie. It somehow just takes the whole heart out of everything. And so for me, that's one of the reasons I in the world that I'm in now, is we make lots of movies. And there's something about that that's very satisfying, even though the sandbox is a little smaller. And so I just feel, I think of myself as a filmmaker, whether I'm directing or producing or as visual effects supervising or whatever it is I'm actually doing.
That's great.
Yeah.
We call them a digital renaissance.
Yeah, I was going to say, the fact that I think you've got to a point that it's pretty great that you can be there. Question and answer section, it looks like we've passed. Can you go to the mic, because they're recording it, so.
Is that what that sign's for? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Q&A. Jason, do you mind going to the mic? There's one on either side, and just one side, sorry, right over here. Sorry. No. Or do you want to ask me or say it to me, and then I'll say it in the mic?
You could have a wireless microphone you hand out there.
I'll leave it to somebody closer.
I can hand this to you.
Oh, I guess my question was, what is the VFX industry still struggling to pull off? Is it? I would argue that it has something to do with like the ability to believably like resurrect actors and actresses, like a believable, completely CG human, which you can't tell. But what would you say?
Yeah, that's something. That's been talked about a lot, you know.
Can you repeat the question? It's more of actors. Like, are we trying to recreate?
It did Tupac.
What can't VFX do?
It's not happening yet, and sort of how long do you see it before we can sort of recreate anything? Because then we're getting closer and closer. But.
Right. So the question is, what is out there that visual effects can't do? You know, what are the limits? What's the big thing left to do? And I think one of the things that's been talked about a lot is stuff like recreating Marilyn Monroe. Arnold Schwarzenegger was actually digitized, and there was talk about preserving him during those days, and there have been some digital Arnolds. I was actually, because I'm one of the early guys, I used to get invited to a lot of panels, and they don't like to invite me anymore because I say things that bother people. But I was on one once about making digital actors. And I made this comment that like, well, you can do that, but in fact, once you have someone's data, you can do anything with it. You could take some famous actor like Arnold and now apply him to a chipmunk, you know, or a anthropomorphic dinosaur. And in fact, you can just think of actors now, who they are changes. It's their data, and it becomes whatever you want. Of course, Tom Cruise is in the audience. It was a setup, actually. And he got up and, you have no right to use my data, whatever. But yeah, seriously.
Wow.
It was a setup. Because I said something like that, I got invited to this talk at the Academy.
I never go to those cult hearings.
Yeah. Actually, I live very close to that cult.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Mark, Ron Fernandez,
Ron, I'm glad to see you. Holy cow.
How are you, sir?
Very good. How you doing?
Very good. Awesome talk. Question, so when you do have to interact with skin puppets, you're actually dealing with actors. What's the balance? How do you make them excited when it's a virtual world? It's all green screen. How do you connect with them and track them through the performance and their arc and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, it's hard for a couple reasons. One is that when you let's pretend they're in front of green screen. It's hard for everybody. Like the actors themselves, you're reminding them, okay, you're screaming now because you're seeing your, the monster's just devoured your child. So it's like acting, but I mean, they have to keep all this in their mind because there's nothing there to work with. And it's not easy. And the same is true of the director. You have to remember all the context. I mean, if you're in the room after the fire, it's all this burnt stuff and there's crap on the floor, it's easy to sort of understand the business you need from the actors. And it's hard. I mean, it causes a lot of complication. And I think that's one of the reasons that big visual effects sequences oftentimes feel kind of dry. They feel a little, even though they're chock full of crap, stuff, they emotionally, they're almost mind-numbing. And I think that's part of it because it's all the stuff and the simple parts of how the person's behaving or even how they're walking because the stuff's not there. It gets complicated. Now, the movies that do it better, they on the green screen set, they put enough there so that there's physical interaction of some sort. But it's, even editing. I mean, this happens all the time. You're cutting together the sequence and there's nothing there. There's people on green screen. It's really tricky because you have to sort of, you have to see it as the editor. And of course, what we usually do is we mock things up very quickly. So we'll do very quick comps to help them do it. But it's not simple. And it's, see, to me, modern editing, and for example, with these nonlinear systems, you can try a million things at once. But let's say in the old days, even on Jurassic, we use chems and that kind of stuff, moviolas. So you kind of have to commit because you can't be cutting your negative constantly, and you can't be getting additional prints all the time because you screwed everything up. So it requires you to have more you've objectified it in your mind, even though what you're seeing is incomplete. It does demand a lot more, actually. I mean, it's a really good question. I was actually reading something about the editing of Gravity, and they were talking about some of these issues of how you develop the pacing because you're not seeing all the other stuff that's happening, you're imagining it. And that's an example where experience makes a big difference. You've done it. And I think the job of directors in the end, another thing I would say is if directing is your thing, the real fundamental job of the director is, under all circumstances, make it work. And so that means you can really, in your mind, think of all this stuff. And as you're looking at the green screen, it's all there. You're seeing it. Oh no, the debris is flying this way. And so I'm gonna, you just have to make it work in your head.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steven. My question is for the upcoming movie Jurassic Park 4. What are you hoping to see be done better than what was done in Jurassic Park 1?
Tim asked me earlier, what's next? And I used to say this after Jurassic Park. I'd say, forget about using computers. Let's get that genetic engineering working. I mean, that's the real special effect. And no one's done it yet. But I don't know, I don't know what they can do. That's what I mean is it's so mature now, I'm not exactly sure what to expect. Hopefully it's not like Transformers, whatever the last one is, where it's just more, you know. Hopefully there'll be something, substantial there. Maybe they'll be talking about, maybe they'll do things like dinosaurs that are more half bird-like. They've talked about feathers. There's all kinds of things that were talked about even in the days of Jurassic that were never explored. I mean, that's one thing about dinosaur movies that are interesting is that you learn things about them, You learn things about dinosaurs. So maybe there'll be some more about that. I always wanted them to do the giant insect thing, but that's because the atmosphere and everything was different. That's stuff that I learned in Jurassic Park. They had giant pseudoscorpions because the air, I forget what it was now, the air had more carbon dioxide, it was denser, I think. The atmosphere is denser, wouldn't support humans, but it supported these giant creatures that don't exist any longer.
I think, yep.
Hi, my name is Taylor Spence.
Hello.
I had a couple questions. The first one is, you did all the research about the dinosaurs before, was it before you got even the okay that you were going to do Jurassic Park in the first place? And
well,
how long before did you start researching?
Well, actually, we did some research, but very basic. We did the big heavy-duty research after we got the go-ahead. Then we brought down the paleontologists. Then we had people, showing us all the stuff. Then we made special trips to go to, meet the rhino handlers. That was after we got the okay, because we started spending lots of dough to do all this stuff. But Jurassic was unique because there was a tremendous pre-production period, and the actual post-production period is very long too. I think we worked on it roughly about 1.5 years total. It was a very unusual project in that regard. Nowadays, your post-production period might be 12 weeks, maybe it's 16, right. Maybe it's 20, but it depends. I think again, back then, it was so open-ended. It hadn't been done that much that people were much more cautious, meaning we better have enough time. Now it's the other way.
My second question was, you said you worked under Ed Catmull, if you still have a relationship, and if you would ever consider working on or contributing to a Pixar film?
Would I consider it? Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'd want me to, but yeah, Ed was one of my thesis advisors. I actually haven't talked to him in some time. Of course, if I saw him, we'd go have he wouldn't have a drink, but I would have a drink, and he's a very, very health conscious fellow. But yeah, he and another fellow named Jim Blinn, who you guys may or may not know of, were some of the early inventors of a great deal of the basis of computer graphics. And they both went to teach at Berkeley, and then I went there and he was my thesis advisor. Another little tidbit is I have a PhD. And because back in those days, the technology required to do computer graphics was quite unbelievable. In fact, I was at Berkeley, and Lawrence Livermore Labs is where they make atom bombs. And they had these supercomputers called Crays. I don't know if you've heard about this stuff. And we got clearance. What they would do is they would literally call us, in 20 minutes you're going to have 30 minutes of compute time on the supercomputer. And they would wipe it clean because it's all super secret stuff. This is before the internet, actually. It was called the ARPANET. This is, think about this. And I would take my little programs to do little bouncing glass balls or whatever it was, download it on the Cray, get my 30 minutes of computer time, and then back would come the data, the pictures. And those computers in that day, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars. It's a totally different world. And so, so when I first started, that's why I was talking about it initially as experimental film. I'd do like little silly digital things and with dancers and that kind of stuff that only my friends would come to see. And then, but once you started doing this photorealistic stuff, the cost to do it was so outrageous. It was the only places that could afford it were these large commercial enterprises. But anyway, so I'm forgetting what the original question was. Sorry, but oh, with Ed Catmull. So he was very interested in pushing for the technology, and he taught at Berkeley. But George Lucas hired him to start the Lucasfilm Digital Film Group. So he left and was at ILM while I finished my PhD, and then I went to work there. But George had spent so much money. He was a visionary. You got to give him a lot of credit for that. That he sold it to Steve Jobs for a pittance. I mean, he lost a lot of money on the whole endeavor. And Pixar and Jobs realized it was a steal, took all these geniuses. I stayed because at that time, my interest was in live action filmmaking, not so much, again, my roots were, I don't know, you know, in an independent film, my roots as a youngster is I saw all the American movies. When I was really young, I loved the horror films. But then as a later teenager and a young adult, I was really enraptured by the European filmmakers. Guys, do you guys know who Jodorowsky is? He made a film called El Topo. I saw that when I was like 17, and it just blew my mind. And that's the world that was really sort of led me to do led me. It's funny. That's what started me on this path. But then I kind of, you know, it's a weird circuit. So when I never, Disney to me was the evil empire. You know, I think, you know,
Still to this day.
Actually, this part you can't broadcast. Okay, you got to cut this part out. But see, I think that Disney he's a well-intentioned guy, but he figured out something he's a genius, and that is, you get them while they're young, and you have them for the rest of their lives.
It's like cigarette companies.
Exactly.
That's what I said was that.
And I see the inner workings of that. I mean, I worked for Disney too, so. But anyway, so I was enamored of the world of T2 and the Abyss and even Jurassic, and wasn't so interested in doing the kind of films that they've done, even though they're brilliant. They just weren't what I was. I mean, my feelings are different today, but back then I was all about the pain and suffering that's inherent in life.
Was Ed the one who had the idea of bringing Timothy O'Leary to the range?
No, that
wasn't it.
You want to get one of those stories? You also can't broadcast this either.
This is a great story.
I'll tell you a little bit. At ILM, because we were like little high school rebels in a way, and I taught. They let us do anything. They let us have access to all the amazing gear, and I used to have this thing I called Film History 1Z, and I would show these movies that were unusual, and we even invited filmmakers to come. In fact, there's another movie. Do you guys know a movie called The Sweet Movie? You do. So who knows the Sweet Movie?
Savas.
Okay. So Makaveyev, he was actually, he came, we were able to fly him out, and he gave a lecture and showed his movie. And the reason I met him is because, again, in my early days as a youth, in my experimental film thing, I got to know the group of artists called the Actionists. You know Action? You guys should talk to this guy, because so when I was very young, and I was really into punk music and that kind of stuff, and I found out about these artists from Europe who were doing stuff that was way beyond in the 60s. I mean, they were way beyond. And then someone showed me, there's a section of they had a thing called the Therapy Commune, and it's in this movie called The Sweet Movie, and just don't tell your parents I told you to see it, okay? But it's basically about it's the struggle between the proletarian and the bourgeoisie. In fact, one of my favorite. I never have posted a looking for a woman ad, but it would be a proletarian gentleman looking for a sexy bourgeois woman. Objective class struggle. Anyway, sweet movie. I recommend it a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pei.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark.